Hey guys, it's Quana back again with another review. Hope you guys are doing awesome. So today we're going to be breaking down Swarm episode 6 entitled Falling Through the Cracks. This episode is unique in the series because it takes on a true crime documentary aesthetic, and we are given a whole new cast of characters who are portraying the real life versions of who we've been seeing, or at least relating the stories we've been seeing so far in the show. And I'm going to be honest, this episode kind of took me aback at first, but once I got into it, I actually really enjoyed this episode, and it's probably my second favorite episode of the season. Before we get started, don't forget to click that subscribe button down below, because I promise you do not want to miss episode 7 as I give you my final thoughts on what I think this show is saying thematically, what this show is doing, and what perhaps everything means altogether, right? We meet Detective or Major Loretta Greene, who is working, I believe, with like the Nashville PD, and she is taking on like solving all of these crimes that have been happening and connecting it to this serial killer that she thinks is out there. We find out about a young woman who's in her 20s who is killed named Tiffany Long. We also learn about an older woman who is killed named Dorothy Day or Greene, I believe. Not Greene, Gray maybe. And she's killed, and she's piecing together all these puzzle pieces because these murders are so very strange. Most importantly, one of the things she's noticing about these murders is that there's junk food left at the scene of the crime. Eventually, we see her kind of reenacting, and let me first of all say Loretta Greene is played by Heather Sims. She does a phenomenal job as this police detective in this episode, especially because it's taking on this true crime aesthetic. It could be a little bit disarming because we're so used to what we've been seeing so far, but she is comedic gold in this episode, and she kind of, unless I'm tripping, gives me like Viola Davis vibes, but if Viola Davis was more comedic, like little hand gestures and things, the way that she would like hold her lips and even like the shape of her nose and her mouth was really giving me Viola Davis, but in a good way, like in the best way possible, because like who doesn't love Viola Davis, right? But anywho, then she gets to the story of the strippers killing the Good Samaritan who helped them. And guys, remember we said earlier that a lot of these stories are actually based on real events. This is based on a real event. Now, they don't use the real photo or the real names of the individuals who are involved in that crime, but that is based on a real event that happened with 4 strippers killing this man who helped them change their tire. And we, of course, have seen this whole story, backstory built up around it. As Detective Greene is doing her casework, she finds out that the guy who was killed, Mr. Wilkins, was not a fan of this bleeped out unnamed superstar who we know, of course, to be the queen herself, Miss Beyonce. And she makes a connection to who the strippers say was a 5th stripper who was with them, a girl named Carmen, who disappeared and fled the scene and was involved with the murder as well, although she did not directly have a hand in killing this gentleman. As she continues to go on and starts piecing together the puzzle and like connecting this possible other crimes, it leads her back to Texas and to Khalid's house where she meets his brother, and she finds out about Marissa. And of course, the big reveal moment is when she goes to the Jackson's home and she meets Mrs. Jackson, and we find out that Mr. Jackson has died. He died from cancer, and it calls into question the whole timeline of things that happened, because of course we just finished the episode where he was trying to kill Dre, but to find out that he actually died from cancer, and assuming that that was like an ongoing battle and that he, was going through it, when would that event have even happened? When did that take place? We don't know. So now it's calling into question. But a lot of the clues around the house are the same. Dre's been removed from all the photographs. Marissa's room and her things in her room are not in that attic location where we saw them, or like kind of off to the side where we saw them in last week's episode, but they're in a very brightly lit room, a much different look. And we of course see like the real life versions of Dre and Marissa. And we're given a whole backstory from Marissa. We see how she was teased mercilessly at school for performing at like an open mic and performing a country song at an open mic. We find out that there's an event that happened at a sleepover where Dre attacked one of the girls at the sleepover and attempted to kill her because she was playing a prank on Marissa. And we find out like the reference of like spilling the milk whenever she cut people, whenever she saw blood, and we see that shows up here. But a lot of other things that we find out from Marissa's mother, such as they did try to have her see a child psychologist, they did try to get help for her, but also the fact that Mr. Harris made her sleep in the attic kind of away from the rest of the family, which makes it really suspect. And even the girl who didn't like her called into question the decision for them to get rid of Dre, and it's like, who just gets rid of their child like that? And then finally, the detective goes to visit the social worker who was Dre's case manager, but she's not giving anything. She's just really adamant about protecting these kids, and that they just want to find out information about her so they can have some kind of sob story, so they can like make a mockery of her pain. And she does not want them to do that, so she doesn't tell them any information. At the very end of the episode, when it looks like all hope is lost and that she's not going to be able to crack the case, she finds out that there was someone arrested in Atlanta, and looking at the photos that were sent to her, it looks to be Dre, now going by the name Tony. And in this lineup, in this photograph, Tony has straight back cornrows and has a more masculine look than what we've seen in the other photos that they presented of her on stage or on screen. And we find out that she was arrested at a Beyonce concert, having stormed this stage. Lots of things that we find out. And just the fact that this episode is done in this format is like the ultimate breaking of the fourth wall, because at the end of the show, if you stay through the credits, you see a clip of Donald Glover being interviewed on the red carpet, being asked what is he working on next, and he exclaims that he's working on a show about Andrea Greene, which is like kind of like suggesting that people already know who that is and are already aware of her, so she's gotten some notoriety for the things that she's done. That story has already broken, and he says that he's working on a show about her life starring Dominique Fishback, and we see an article with Dominique Fishback's picture in it. And so we know that everything that we've seen in the first 5 episodes is the show that he has been working on, that he's been creating. So that puts us in the position of knowing that like this is a show, and that changes everything, because it acknowledges the fact that things have been added in the show that were not reflected in real life, and that we have to then judge them as just being additions to a show and not reflections of real life. And it's a real interesting conversation. I'm gonna break things down a little bit for you and how my mind works, which is when we watch media, television, movies, you are watching that story play out, and those characters are kind of like avatars of real humans. They're not real humans, but while the actors are portraying them, they are real humans brought to life. And you are supposed to not have an idealized version of them. Viola Davis said in a clip, and I'll put the clip down below because I don't know if I'll be able to like pin it in this video, but that when actors are bringing characters to life, they can't try to make the audience feel like the character, because people are not just one way, that they have to just make the character real. that's kind of what's happening here, which is we're watching this show and we're watching the character of Dre as though she's a real person, but then they add this other layer by making it seem as though she's a real person, even though we know she's not. She's created for this show. But it's like two versions of her that they've created two versions of Dre for this show, which means the version that we have been seeing is unreliable because it is breaking the wall and reminding us that this is a show version, which means stuff that we've seen did not necessarily happen in the way that it happened in real life. And then there's like the title of this, Falling Through the Cracks, and what Detective Greene says earlier, which is about young Black girls falling through the cracks, no one thinking that, no one checking for Black women for these types of things. And even that has layers to it because it's like there are no shows about Black female serial killers, really. We're just now starting to see Black women villains in horror. So it's the literal like falling through the cracks, like missing girls who get lost in the system, all of those different things, how they in real life fall through the cracks. But then even in media, how Black women often are not seen or not recognized. And because of this is kind of like bringing to light that this is a possibility and that these characters are interesting, just as interesting as their white male counterparts might be. The other thing that struck me is something that she said early on, which is about the importance of family. And when they were interviewing the Beyonce fan, super fan, Daryl Robinson, played by Chris Gerard, I think, and he has on like the Ivy Park-esque jumpsuit, he talks about the Hive being like family and the things they do for like family. And that seemingly is the through line to the show. If you think about Marissa and Dre as being sisters, everything that Marissa has been doing so far, and also Nyjah, because what did Marissa tell her in episode 3 or 4? She said Nyjah is our sister. So she establishes the fact that this is like a sisterhood, they're family, and you do anything to protect your family. And that is like a common theme that we see, and that is reiterated in this episode. So I think, just my opinion, for as of right now, if you were uncertain about what this show is really about, it's really, yes, it's this woman who's having these psychotic moments, these psychotic breaks, and has gone crazy as a serial killer, and it's a horrible, horrible thing. But the rationale for why she's doing it is because she's searching for this idea of family and acceptance, something that she didn't have, because when she lived with the Jacksons, she was made to live in the attic. And before that, we don't even know anything about her life before that. We know she lived with a grandmother, and we don't know any idea of like what her family connection was. So she's searching for that, and she's willing to do anything to get it, even killing people. But this episode was funny, but also so smart and clever, in my opinion, to use this true crime documentary style, because it's so popular right now, and to bring that into the levels of the show was such a smart, clever thing to do. If you did not call the number on the screen at the end, I'm just going to say you might get a nice little surprise if you call it, because it is a real working number, and I did call it, and it is interesting what you get when you call it. But I really enjoyed this episode. It is a toss-up because I really enjoyed episode 1. I know a lot of people's favorite episode, and the favorite on IMDb is episode 4, Running Scared. But I think episode 1 is my favorite. Running Scared is probably my third favorite. I enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to give Billie Eilish her props. But I also felt like there was less attachment to those killings, and so I was more intrigued by the killings that she had like a personal stake in. I've heard some people hypothesize that the sister who was killed in this episode, Tiffany Long, is meant to represent the killing that took place at the cult. And at the end of this episode, they say that Andrea Greene is a person of interest in 8 killings. So it's the man who was killed by the strippers, Tiffany Long, the older lady, possibly Marissa, possibly Khalid, which would give us 5 people. And the Haley and her boyfriend, perhaps they've managed to connect them to it, and that would leave one more person, which would be like the YouTuber. But I think one thing that is really interesting about this show and about this particular episode is it calls into question those other killings, because the detective was only able, really, she was pulling all of the killings from like the southern and western areas, so Houston, Nashville, Fayetteville, Tennessee, Arkansas. She didn't mention anything about what may have happened out west or anything that even happened in Atlanta. So that begs the question, did all of the murders that we saw on screen with Dre really happen the way that they happened? Let me know down below in the comments what you think about all of this, what all this means, and what you thought about this episode. And I will see you guys for the finale video. Yeah, because I have thoughts that I haven't said yet because I don't want to spoil anything. So don't forget to hit subscribe, leave comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Toodles!